Subspace Relay is filmed in front of a live NPC audience.
Hailing frequencies open. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, UFS. This is Emma King.
Rich Lombardia signing on for another episode of Subspace Relay. We have a great episode for you today, but first, let's start with Here, There, Everywhere, news from the fleet. Just a reminder, promotions are due the 15th of every month. Look at the calendar. Is it before July 15th? Have you seen a crewmate or member do something amazing? Get those recommendations in.
Branch Commander for Medical, that would be me. Anyway, she would like to remind you that mental health is as important as physical health. Feeling stressed, but can't bring yourself to try meditation on its own? Try out Tai Chi every Tuesday at 3 o'clock and yoga every Friday at 3 p.m. for guided sessions.
DJ Kestrel spins tunes every Monday and Wednesday. Check the calendar for times.
Academy office hours are being held nearly every day of the week now. If you have questions, drop on by. Full details at ufstarfleet.org.
Trying to find a ship? Want to schedule a ride-along? Check the calendar for an up-to-date schedule for missions.
And some special announcements today. First, congratulations to UFS Metamorphosis for their incredible job coordinating the Relay for Life events this year. Many laps were walked, many stories exchanged, and we are more proud than ever to be part of UFS.
The Academy experience is in full swing as our cadets just completed year one. They had their big event. We had a huge turnout for membership that helped add to the experience. The cadets are investigating a mysterious ailment that leaves females with temporary paralysis. And it's not just from dealing with the men of UFS. They may have finally found the evidence they need to get the adults to listen. Tune in this Sunday at 1:30, Second Lifetime, for the exciting conclusion.
Looking for more to do? Check the events listing on ufstarfleet.org.
Today's fact of the day. You can easily tell the difference between an alligator and a crocodile by paying attention to which one of the animals sees you later or in a while. Today, for interviews, oh good, we are going to interview our very own Emma King. We're going to get the scoop on what it takes to be a UFS medical officer. So Emma, let's start with the highlights of playing a medical officer in UFS.
Well, one of the highlights is we get to be sort of the fun officers because a lot of the time the mission isn't dependent on us. So we can sit back and be as snarky as we want. All the best one-liners came from Bones in the original series, so far as I'm concerned.
I'd have to agree with you. Definitely one of my favorite of the medical officers. So it can't all be fun and games, right? There has to be some sort of drawback, or is there?
There are a few. The biggest being if you're on a mission that does not yet involve medical, there's a little bit of downtime in there, which you can deal with. And the other being one of the jokes that sort of comes up among the medical circles is that medical is the only branch that everybody else thinks they can do better. So you tell them like that seems like something you should get checked out by a doctor, and they're like, no, I'm fine, I'll walk it off.
You have no legs. So
It's only a flesh wound. You're like, do you know you've got a giant pulsing parasite hanging off the back of your neck? Because I might want to get that. No, it's fine. I'll just have science look at it later. Like, all right. Whatever you say, Cupcake.
So to be a successful medical officer, what are some resources that you recommend?
Well, not to harken back to Mr. Northman's advice, but honestly, I keep open some of the medical manuals that we have available through the classes. I always have a Google window open. Wikipedia is helpful. Since it's medical, it's easy to, well, and same thing with science, I suppose. It's easy to play off real-life discoveries or things that you've learned in the past. And also helpful to sort of do a quick search through, Memory Alpha, looking for past cases that are similar to what you're dealing with to help you sort of build your knowledge. It's not like you have to actually know how to be medical. You just have to be able to think quick on your feet and be creative, which I guess is true with all the branches.
Yeah, I'm sure most people wouldn't know you're just talking out of your mouth anyway. Right? 'Cause that's how we expect all doctors to be. Just kidding.
Yes.
Now, you talked about one of the drawbacks being that until you're needed, there's a little bit of downtime. What do you think are some things or what are some things that you do during that downtime to help keep yourself active and engaged and having fun?
Well, as CMO on the Maxwell, one thing we do a lot is start doing crew evaluations. Technically, everybody on a starship needs to have had their yearly checkup at the very least. And it gives not only my doctors a chance to have something to do whenever we're not directly needed, but it also gives those other officers on the ship, or even those other non-officers or civilian players on the ship, a chance to have something to do while they wait for the ship to get wherever they're going. So whilst science is scanning down a planet, I can call in, say, to Ellis and give her a checkup to see if she should still be on my ship or not. Granted, we're on a long-haul mission right now, so I don't know what I would do if one of them shouldn't be on my ship anymore.
Well, food for the kitchen, right? No, I'm kidding. So, you ever find yourself in a scenario where you're the only role player doctor that's on duty, but yet you have multiple role players with varying injuries? How do you handle that?
That one can be a tough one. Fortunately, I've got a very good captain, and she gives me a little bit of leeway. So I do have an NPC staff, technically, that I can lean on. And when push comes to shove, as it did recently when there were just too many people for myself, and there was one other doctor, Dr. Vespri, but we were a little outnumbered. And so I was allowed to conjure the emergency medical hologram. And so I, on the side, run them as a separate character. It helps that I can type quite fast. But it's just a matter of figuring it out. Triage helps a lot with that one. If you can figure out who needs you right now and who needs you later. And sometimes you can press other officers in if they're not all busy defending the ship at that moment. So it's just a matter of managing your own time and figuring out a way that works for you. There's no easy solution in that situation. You just have to be creative.
I love it. And, that's fantastic because there could be, like you said, other players that maybe don't have a major role, and then you can pull them in and give them something to do and keep them active, engaged. So that's fantastic. So, I know medical is where all the guts and glory usually is, right? Or on a away team. But what about when you're on the bridge or, other areas of the ship that are not specific to medical? What do you do from a role-playing perspective when there's not an emergency? Like you haven't been called to the cafe because somebody's dying of food poisoning.
They would never die of food poisoning on our ship. They would probably just die of regular poisoning from the cook. But on deck, if I'm on hand and there isn't anything particularly medical going on, I'll help out with science. Science and medical, despite what myself and Mr. Northman may imply, actually has quite a bit of overlap. And so whenever they're doing planetary scans, I can try to match against known pathogens. Technically, the ship is always running diagnostics on its own systems and monitoring the airways, so you can sort of mess around with that. Also, if you've got a little paperwork you need to catch up on, you can do that. Or ask if you can go grab a quick cup of coffee. And of course, we should remember, medical officers don't just have to be involved in medical. In fact, in The Next Generation, Dr. Crusher was frequently the the officer of the watch on the bridge of the Enterprise, sort of during the midnight hours. So there are lots of ways that you can find things to do. You just have to be willing to maybe step out of what your initial idea of what it means to be a medical officer is.
Love that. So, you've been in medical for a while. Can you tell me one of your funniest or most interesting medical moments?
Um, that's kind of a tough one. I have to say, it's often quite dramatic whenever people end up in the medical bay. Probably the funniest was dealing recently. Oh, I need to write up a blog on that, come to think of it. This is where Nora demotes me because I haven't done that yet. Tay Ellis came in with under duress. I had to have her requisitioned into the medical bay with a strange ailment, which I could not ask about the origins of beyond confirming that it was likely that that was the origin for a number of reasons involving her character's history. And that was pretty fun / funny. The symptoms meant she couldn't lie anymore. So that was, as you can imagine, quite amusing. And then probably some of the more interesting moments. We did have a day where I just had a medical bay full of people who had passed out. Looked across the medical bay and everybody was in there and everybody was passed out. So that was an interesting moment.
Are you trying to say Nora worked them too hard?
Well, Nora was sort of incapacitated at the moment, so it was just a strange moment where I realized, like, if this keeps going on the way it is, I'm going to be the only officer standing at all.
Most suspicious?
I mean, if you want to take over the ship, I guess that would be the way to do it, really.
Yeah, that or Starfleet Order 104 Section C, at least according to Memory Alpha. Now, for those that aren't up on their general orders and regulations, this is specific to medical. Should it be proven with admissible evidence that a flag officer who has assumed command was medically or physically unfit to command, the ship's ranking officer could relieve them on a best basis. However, such an act was required to be supported by an appropriate certificate of unfitness by the ship's chief medical officer, right? So requiring the CMO to produce test results or to that effect, clear evidence such as the act of attempted suicide and such. And this has happened on a few cases, but it's not just a flag officer, but you actually have the ability to relieve the captain of the ship, right? And God.
Oh, technically, I have the ability to relieve anybody on the ship if I feel that they are no longer medically capable of continuing with their duties, or if I have, solid cause as outlined in 104. So yeah, I can't. That extends. I mean, technically, I guess if I were the CMO here on Pinestri, I could relieve even the admirals if needed. So it's a pretty big order, really, that 104.
Yeah, and there's been a couple of times that we've seen that in the shows that are pretty interesting, and just for our listeners, we'll say that potential spoiler alert. Though, if you haven't seen these episodes, I don't know how you can call yourself a Star Trek fan. That's just me talking, but they mentioned a TOS episode called The Doomsday Machine. And upon encountering that planet killer, right, First Officer Spock decides not to attack that at that particular time, but Commodore Matthew Decker insisted that they press the attack. And when Spock said he refused, right, so Decker relieved him of command, then carried out an attack, which actually resulted on the Enterprise being serious damage. And then when Kirk was able to establish those communications back with the Enterprise, he ordered Spock to relieve Decker of command. Decker asserted that Spock didn't have the authority to do so, but relented when Spock told him that he could file a formal protest if they survived to reach the starbase. Right? So it's kind of interesting that Spock's not the CMO, so it was that threat of being able to file that, right? That action that seemed very very aggressive and just disregard the safety and security of the Enterprise crew. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think the original series is interesting in that most of the time, and I'm going to go ahead and include the reboots in this, although obviously those are their own little magical, barely acknowledged universe. It's most often one of the officers relieving another officer rather than medical, which we see happen much more in TNG and Voyager, and I think to a lesser extent DS9. I confess I have not seen much of Enterprise, so I can't I can't say for that one. That those earlier episodes were much more interested in, well, not interested in, but focused around the idea of being emotionally compromised as opposed to medically or mentally compromised. Um, and I think the case the Planet Killer shows that a lot. The Decker is acting out of fear more than like reasoned thought, and that seems to be the thing that the original series was concerned with, as opposed to the later series, where the big concern is that the captain will ignore a medical issue that will compromise the entire crew. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And since you've brought up TNG, right? So their Lonely Among Us is an interesting one because in that one, Captain Picard is actually possessed by an alien entity and he begins acting in an increasingly strange manner, right? So then when he announces his intention to beam off the ship with that entity, right? Dr. Crusher just relieves him of duty on the basis that he was mentally disabled, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he overpowers the crew, he beams off the ship, and then they actually get him back when that alien can't go on without him. But, this is one interesting scenario where he's not acting on his own power, but because of his actions, he is relieved of command.
Yeah, and that is definitely something that comes up a few times in TNG, not necessarily with Picard, but I do find it interesting that we've never seen a medical officer being relieved of duty for the same reason. And I'm thinking I can't remember the name of the episode. We all know it as soon as I say ghost boyfriend, right? Dr.
Yeah.
Beverly Crusher's ghost
Uh-huh.
boyfriend.
Yep.
She was definitely compromised then, but none of her officers noticed that there was something up there. And certainly, anytime you feel like your captain is no longer, or any officer is no longer acting under their own volition, we really should step in there and have somebody who is not being controlled by another entity maybe be in charge for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think about her staff and how observant they were, or maybe they just feared the repercussions of being wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another interesting, you mentioned the Star Trek reboots and the alternate Kelvin timeline, um, and things occurring in a different time are some of the more interesting aspects of Star Trek. And when we look at Voyager, when continuing our discussion on being relieved of command, right? So there was a two-part series called Year of Hell, and in the second one, just a little lead in, right? So there was an alternate timeline that was created by a Kremen time weapon, right? And the Doctor is forced to relieve Janeway of her command. So Janeway is severely injured, and the Doctor felt she was just becoming obsessed, and relieved her under the medical regulations, right? But at that time, there was only a handful of people left on Voyager, right? The Brig's offline, so he really had no way to enforce his decision. All he could do is threaten that he would, note it in his log, and that she'd be risking a court martial. Of course, when they destroyed the temporal weapon and they removed that entire trade timeline. That whole scenario was gone. But that does leave an interesting situation is if you're in such a dire situation, how do you enforce that decision? Like, do you just, I'll note it in my log, right? But the captain's still leading you toward hell. What do you think
There,
about that?
that's a that I That is the difficulty with this particular order, is that it assumes that everybody is going to take your advice. And if we will think back to about 10 minutes ago, whenever I said everybody always second guesses medical. And so, although I personally have not had to inflict the order on somebody, I have had to sit down and speak with our executive officer about the possibility that it may be put in place. And we say the doctor can just relieve somebody, but if the rest of the crew doesn't acknowledge that, then it doesn't make a difference. Then you can just throw the doctor in the brig. So I think we have to be careful about how we use it, but more importantly, if we are going to, that we have enough power to actually carry through with it. And the poor doctor, of course, he can't leave the medical bay. I don't think he could at that point. And there's nobody there to help him enforce it, at which point it just becomes literally a note in the log, right? I suggested this and I'll be vindicated whenever we get back to HQ. But it does show you kind of need the crew to agree with you on some level in order to make it work. Really.
Absolutely. It's really a relationship between, the medical staff that have to make that decision, right? You're held accountable. You need to present the evidence that you were right in your decision to relieve that commanding officer. But you also need the support, right? What if the XO doesn't support you, or other senior staff members? Like, that's just a very difficult situation. But on the reverse, what if the XO or other senior staff members feel the captain is not performing competently, and they want you to make that determination to remove him from command? And there's not quite enough evidence, though the captain might be acting erratic. And let's talk about the Enterprise incident. And in that particular case, um, you know, Bones has noted, and again, we know TOS is kind of a different time, right? But Bones notes that the captain has been aggressive and erratic as of late, and then he suddenly announces that they're going to break treaty and go right into the Romulan neutral zone, right? Which lands them into a heap of trouble, and we learn that this was all part of a much larger plan. But that particular, did he have enough? Could he have relieved him of command before he made that decision, or right when he decided to do it, noting what that meant, or what that could mean? I mean, that could mean war between the Federation and the Romulan Empire.
Yeah. It's a sticky subject, which is why I think it's an interesting one to look at. I always feel sort of annoyed if we carry that over to our little Abrams reboot in the first film, which I guess was just called Star Trek. Was it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Kirk starts a fight with Spock to prove that Spock is emotionally compromised and can't lead the ship, which is the most preposterous thing I've ever seen. Like, my inner medical officer just grates at that. That somebody coming in and acting violently aggressive towards somebody else is then going to be the person whom we should be following because he's the one that we should listen to in that scenario. And if you really think about it, if we went by that as our precedence, and thankfully we don't because that's in a separate timeline from us, that would mean anytime somebody dies on the ship, you could technically relieve the captain or the XO or the CMO or the CO, whoever knew that person, because of course if their friend died, they're emotionally compromised in some way. And the idea that Spock was being a bad leader behind that, there's really no evidence for. So that, like, oh, you're emotionally compromised, you can't lead the ship. Like, give me a break. He was not. He was fine. You know who was emotionally compromised? Kirk was emotionally compromised. And I know Bones liked him. Yeah, I know Bones liked him, but probably should have stepped in there and been like, no, Spock's probably the better head to lead us on this one. But that's not what makes a good movie.
Right.
But it is...
But go ahead.
It is a very collaborative thing. I mean, obviously, we are, as an audience, told that this was the right choice because the crew backs him. But if the crew hadn't backed him, if they had been like, no, put him in the brig, he's way out of line, it would have been a very different scenario. So again, you kind of need to have your XO and your fellow officers and the crew at least partly behind you. It's very hard to say that a captain is, or any officer is, no longer medically fit for duty when everybody feels like they're just doing their job as they always do.
Yeah. And it's such an interesting point too, because I mean, he pushes his buttons on purpose, and then it's like, oh, I pushed his buttons, he reacted to it, so now he's mentally compromised. The only argument I could try to come up with, if playing devil's advocate, is that his Vulcan training should have kept him in a more stable and calm, right? But they kind of alluded that Spock has a very he does have that line, as when he was younger and the other kids, he finally flipped out and beat the snot out of the kid who deserved it. But that I think that from that perspective, seeing your CO nearly kill somebody, versus having restraining him, doing the neck pinch and knocking him out, having security take him away, might have been enough for that particular, for them to believe. But even still, like, Uhura makes that comment right after, like, I hope you know what you're doing. It's
Yeah.
it's very, it is a very interesting line there. But fantastic discussion, very interesting topic. Well, thank you so much, Dr. King, for your insight into the medical branch. I think we should transition to our quote of the day.
Our quote of the day today is from my favorite, Jean-Luc Picard, from the episode Inner Light, and it is, "Live now. Make now always the most precious time. Now will never come again."
That's beautiful.
And now I think we go to a brief break for an actual commercial. This is exciting.
Absolutely.
Every journey begins with a single step. Every path brings new opportunities. Every interaction brings new friends. Every skill makes us stronger. So join us for the United Federation Starfleet Academy Experience. All you have to do is take a step.
We're back. We're going to play an interesting game today called Planetary Crisis. In this game, we're going to bring out our very own producer, James. How you doing, James? We're going to have you compete against our own Dr. King here. We know that you guys are both Star Trek and Star Wars fans. So in this game, in a thrilling 3-round, we are going to name a planet. I'll start with Emma, then I'll move over to you. You need to tell me if the planet is in the Star Trek or Star Wars universe. If you're right, for round 1, you get a point. If you're wrong, you get nothing. So, questions? Everybody ready?
Good to go.
Bring it on.
All right. So, of course, being round one, these are going to be a little bit easier. So, let's get started. Emma, is this Star Trek or Star Wars? Heller Prime.
Heller Prime?
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek.
Correct. 1 point.
Yay!
Right? James. Bajor.
Star Trek.
Correct. 1 point. Emma. Alderaan.
Oh no, Alderaan. I don't. Star Wars.
Correct. You were at 2 points. James. Ryza.
Star Trek.
Correct. You are at 2 points. All right. Emma. Mustafar.
Star Wars?
Correct. James. Camino.
Did you say Camino?
Camino.
That's Star Wars.
Ooh, we finished round one, 3-3. Good job. All right, we're moving into round two where the points are doubled. Each one is worth 2 points. I'm going to start with you, Emma. Ready?
Yes.
Altair 4.
Star Trek.
Yes.
Whew.
Good job. 5 points. James. Viridian 4.
Radiant 4, that's Star Trek.
Correct, at 5 points. Emma. Ryloth.
Ryloth?
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek.
That
Ah!
one was Star Wars.
Oh, come on. That sounded like a Klingon word.
James. Nimbus 3.
Nimbus 3 is Star Trek.
It is 7 points. All right. Emma. Makier 4. 5, rather.
Mach-Year 5?
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek? Oh my god! I told you it was going to be bad at this one.
James. Florum.
Florum? I believe that's Wars.
It is. You were at 9. Emma's 5. All right, you're not out of it yet, Emma. These are worth 3.
I'm doomed.
All right. Ready? Emma. Turkana 4.
Star Trek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are at 8. James. Spring Lord 5.
Ring Lord 5 is Trek.
It is. You were at 12. All right, Emma. Exegol.
Star Wars?
Yes.
Ha!
You were at 11. James. Herenay Delta 5.
Tyranny Delta 5 is Trek.
It is 15. Emma. Mimbon.
Star Wars.
It is.
This is a lucky guess. I'm literally guessing based on the sound of the words. Does it sound Trek or does it sound Wars?
James. Udapa.
Utapau is Wars.
It is. All right. Round's over. Game is over. James wins 18-14. Good job,
I did okay
guys.
considering I don't know planets at all.
Yeah. Absolutely. And some of these are really tough. Some of them sound like a dessert or like a snack. Like, seriously, I want some mum buns. Right? All right. Well, that concludes our game for today.
And I do believe that brings us to the end of our show. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And today's episode is brought to you by The Dramatic Pause. What to leave your crew in suspense? Try The Dramatic Pause.
Ending transmission.